Undead and Married is a romantic vampire cozy mystery and is book one in Andy Lowe's Blood Bond Agency series. The series is published by Squabbling Sparrows Press and is also available in ebook and paperback.
Chapter 2. Back behind her grandmother's desk, Eva's mind was a whirl about why someone was out to frame a De Silva for murder. She laughed at herself for even thinking she was the target. She was so far down the pecking order in the family that it made no sense. Georgia aside, there were other powerful members of the De Silva clan, those with enemies known to be biding their time. Why, oh why, was she the one stuck looking after the agency? She would much rather be upstairs, in her own office, managing the family's property empire. At least then she felt competent, safer, less like she a target on her back. Construction companies and letting agents were child's play compared to arranging blood bonds. And definitely easier than dealing with the mess she was now facing. No, her parents should be in charge of the agency. Instead, they were off who knew where, with eyes only for each other. Their blood bond was such that it left them oblivious to all else. It was why Georgia forbade them from completing any bonds while she was away. Truth be told, her grandmother would not let them loose on the clients, even if she were in town. Georgia, more than most, knew the chances of my parents completing a successful blood bond were slim. Perhaps even impossible when you were so besotted with your own life partner that breathing was a challenge. In their favor was that with both of them being hemophites, vampires born, breathing was pretty much optional. It was also one reason Georgia had raised Eva since birth. It was better than her dying of starvation and neglect because her parents had forgotten she existed. She hadn't come to any conclusions about the murders when the bell above the front door tinkled into life. A double check of the large leather-bound diary showed the page to be empty, other than a few scribbled notes from her grandmother. Eva flicked her waist-length hair over her shoulders and huffed out in annoyance, both at her missing parents and life. Much as she would love to abandon the agency to its fate, she dares not. Georgia had started it up close to 900 years ago. If the business were to fail while she was in charge, her grandmother would track her down and make her pay, especially if they lost business to love bites. While drop-ins were rare, they weren't unheard of. All she needed to do was schedule an appointment for Georgia's return. Then she could get back to worrying about who was trying to frame her for murder. With her office door partially closed, she couldn't see who it was, although Didi's reaction spoke volumes. Such a shame the old wives' tales about vampires needing to be invited in were purely a fabrication, put about to calm the general populace. In reality, nothing could be further from the truth. It didn't matter that Didi could handle Sebastian Draco. Eva surged to her feet, vaulted the desk despite killer heels, and was in reception a couple of seconds later. How dare that man darken their doorstep? As expected, she found Didi's hands wrapped tight around the throat of the owner of Love Bites. Taking in Sebastian's tuxedo and red-lined cape, Eva's top lip curled in disgust. The guy was a sucker for the whole vampire shtick, as was often the case with nouveau sang, no matter their age. Always out to prove they were tougher and more vampire than anyone else, especially hemophites. Never mind, Sebastian had gained immortality 500 years earlier and was technically older than Eva by a couple of hundred years. He'd always be weaker than she was. And this bothered him, despite his assertions to the contrary. His lack of strength was currently being highlighted in a big way by how Didi was manhandling him. Even on a bad day, the receptionist could take him. Enraged, the 5'0" blonde was stronger than an ox and twice as stubborn. Something Sebastian was finding out the hard way. "Do you welcome all new clients like this?" Sebastian squeaked out past Didi's chokehold. So ludicrous was his question that Didi lost her grip on him. He took advantage, staggering back while straightening his blood-red bow tie. If there was one thing Eva knew about the odious vamp, it was that he was not marriage material. For him to be there to sign on was laughable. There also wasn't a chance she'd match him with anyone currently in the agency's database. Even a nouveau sang girl deserved better than to be saddled with this sack of blood. And not for as long as most vampire unions lasted. Unless, of course, there was a nasty divorce involving a stake or the midday sun. It wasn't something they discussed at the agency, but it happened. And they especially didn't talk about it when a client was in for their third or fourth blood bond. What happened between bonded couples should stay between them, so far as Georgia De Silva was concerned. Eva wasn't as ambivalent, especially not if she was the one sending the vampiric lamb to the veritable slaughter. Hoping to get Sebastian off the premises sooner rather than in pieces, Eva laid a hand on Dee Dee's shoulder when the smaller woman stepped toward the creep. Dee Dee, we should hear him out before we show him out. Fine. Dee Dee crossed her arms tight across her chest and glared at the wannabe standing behind the large Chesterfield. There was no mistaking the deadly intent in her eyes, with Sebastian having to swallow deeply before he could find his voice. Maybe client wasn't the right word. His words had an obsequious quality to them. Eva now glared at him as mutinously as the receptionist. Perhaps this was because she knew what was coming next. It wouldn't be the first time Sebastian had asked for her hand in marriage, and unfortunately, she doubted it would be the last. It would, however, be the first time he dared to ask for her hand while on her home turf. So far as Eva knew, Sebastian had never stepped foot in the blood bond agency. She couldn't believe he was there now. He'd never been brave enough in the past. Her first half-dozen refusals had been polite, but these nights she minced no words in telling him to get lost. Even saying she'd rather stake herself through her right eye than blood bond herself to him had done nothing to dent his bulletproof ego. It would be different if she thought he cared for her, but with him it was all about power. His being bound to a hematite would see his strength doubled or even tripled overnight. It would also open doors to a slew of powerful clans currently closed to him as a nouveau. Sadly, it would also mean she could never have children, that only happening if she was blood-bound to another of her kind. And that didn't appear to be happening soon. Despite her supposedly having inherited George's abilities as a matchmaker, it hadn't done her any good with her own love life. 300 years old and still single was a failure so far as Eva was concerned. If even vampires described her as being on the shelf, there wasn't much hope of a blood bond and coffin for two in her future. She knew it wouldn't be long before they labeled her a spinster. With that fluttering around at the back of her mind, she didn't give Sebastian the courtesy of allowing him to ask. She'd rather live out her days as an old maid than be bound to the likes of him. The answer is still no. No, De Silva could ever be blood bonded to a nouveau, and especially not you. You can go fang yourself if you think I'll be stuck with you. Her words were loud and full of enough scorn that he took an involuntary step backwards. Okay, Dee Dee, now you can get rid of him. The small woman didn't waste time, her feet hardly touching the ground as she flew at their arch-rival. Sebastian hadn't so much as had time to stutter out, "But before Dee Dee's hands again wrapped around his throat. Her eviction of him from the premises was none too gentle, and Eva was okay with this. Even with the front door having slammed shut behind the pair, the sound of Dee Dee upending the odious vamp in the gutter was still satisfyingly loud. Sadly, his cursing the De Silva family for the rest of eternity was as easy to hear, meant for her ears and anyone within the town square. Eva knew full well Captain Useless and his minions would have been able to hear it from their headquarters on the other side of the cobbled expanse. But would they do anything about what was a direct threat? No, they wouldn't. Eva still wasn't sure what Sebastian had on the captain, but knew it had to be something big. Why else would the captain and his crew give Sebastian such a wide berth? Could it be they were even letting him get away with murder? She was still ruminating on this when Dee Dee swung back through the front door. There wasn't a hair out of place, the woman's bright blonde curls as bubbly as ever. Eva couldn't help but smile as the small vampire dusted her hands off in evidence of a job well done. Eva's smile faltered when Sebastian's ultimate threat made its way through the solid front door. You'll soon be crawling to me, you'll see. And with that evil harridan out of town, who'll save you when the police come a-calling? Dee Dee didn't slow, instead twisting around and wrenching the door wide again, all while muttering, "He'll be wearing dentures by the time I've finished with him." Eva followed in the receptionist's wake, keen to see Sebastian have his dental plan updated, only to be disappointed when Dee Dee didn't get a chance. After a high-pitched squeal, Sebastian had fled for the shelter of Love Bites. While Love Bites might have been a short distance from the blood bond agency, it was a million miles away from true love. True lust or bloodlust was more their modus operandi. They didn't even care if they set vampires up with humans, as long as they paid the fee. It was a shame Eva's grandmother considered Sebastian so beneath her as to not warrant the effort of getting rid of him. Instead, she stuck to what she called the moral high ground, despite love bites being the bane of her life. And now it seemed to be Eva's too. Didi and Eva were together on the large couch with mugs of warm blood before Eva put a voice to her thoughts. What do you suppose he meant by the police calling? Didi delicately licked some blood from the rim of her mug before replying. I was wondering about that too. The only thing they'll be interested in at the moment is the murders, and we were here when they happened. Eva's first thought was how they would prove that. Then she remembered the agency's state-of-the-art security system. This would prove beyond doubt they were all on the premises when the murders took place. Even if the police tried to say they'd murdered the young backpackers on the premises, they'd still have had to leave to dispose of the bodies. Of course, opening their records to the police would also mean having to divulge that Georgia was out of the country. And the fewer people, vampires, who knew about that, the better. But if Sebastian knew, then the bat was truly out of the bag, because if he knew, soon everyone would. He loved sharing knowledge like this, as though it gave him power. Eva's thoughts finally settled, allowing her to examine them logically. What if they don't care about us having alibis? We know Sebastian has something on Captain Hugo. The two women fell into quiet contemplation, with Eva eventually breaking the silence. Could this be to force me to marry Sebastian? Didi twisted to face Eva, her eyes alight with fury. Over my undead body. You will not be bloodbound to that man. If I thought he actually cared for me, it would be flattering. It's not nice knowing I'm nothing but a cash cow or a source of power to him. I suspect the divorce would be swift and brutal once we completed the blood bond. A shudder racked Eva's frame at thoughts of the repulsive man driving a stake through her heart. You have that right, darling girl. But you let me worry about that. Didi reached out and gave Eva's hand a reassuring squeeze. What we need to focus on is how he knew Georgia is out of town. The receptionist had a point. While Georgia disappeared around the same time every year, they were always circumspect as regards to her actual departure. Often she returned with many none the wiser as to her absence. The only people who'd know Georgia was out of town were those at her spa, with her canceling her standing appointments while she was away. Add in that she always got head-to-toe treatments before she left, and it would be all too easy for one of them to let slip about this. Or someone saw that her grandmother was in for a full day and put two and two together. It wasn't impossible. Instead of getting up and using the phone, Didi yelled at the top of her lungs. Lilith, we need to see you at reception. She paused before dropping her voice slightly and adding an ominous now. It took longer than it should have for Lilith to make her way down from the penthouse atop the historic building. This was because it was the last place anyone would expect to find a vampire. That made it the perfect spot for their IT department, because it was the last place Eva's grandmother would look. Georgia favored dark, subterranean spaces above all else, meaning even getting her to move her office from the basement to the first floor had been a challenge. Only by fitting blockout drapes to all the windows were they able to convince her. The thing that had finally swung it in the favor of Eva, Didi, and Lilith was their hinting it made good business sense. While Georgia De Silva was stuck in the past as regards technology, she was no slouch in running a profitable business. There was another reason for the IT department's location. If anyone broke in during the day, it gave the security system more time to stop them in their tracks. At night, the women could guard the place themselves, with their hearing and strength more than up to the challenge of dealing with any burglars. During the daytime, they were vulnerable. Being mostly dead to the world, the place was ripe for the picking. Could it be that while they were sleeping, someone had broken in and seen George's travel coffin was missing? Eva was sitting with eyes closed, working on various scenarios, when Lilith rushed into reception. Sorry it took so long. The alarm in the IT room was playing up. Eva's eyes snapped open. What do you mean, playing up? Lilith's brow wrinkled as she tried to find the right words. It was strange. When I punched in the code, nothing happened. It took me 3 goes to get it to arm properly. Eva could no longer stay seated, her body thrumming with energy. She placed her now empty mug on the coffee table and jumped to her feet. Had someone tampered with it? Lilith shook her head but then stopped. I'm not sure. It shouldn't be possible. Our setup is the best money can buy. There aren't many people who could bypass it, especially with the booby traps I've coded in there. Eva stopped her marching back and forth. Booby traps? The Welsh girl grinned. Anyone hacking into our system would find themselves signed up for enough pyramid schemes to take the title of pharaoh. Her smile faltered. When I was alive, my mom was big into those. She told 2 friends and they told 2 friends, and pretty soon she had a mini empire and no friends. The young vampire swiped at her eyes, even though there were no tears in evidence. Eva had trouble comprehending how awful it must have been for her to have to put her whole life to one side like that. Unable to visit her parents, to let them know she was okay. Dead, well, technically undead, but still. Eva, Didi, and Georgia were Lilith's family now. Lilith wasn't even the name the girl was born with. That would be Susan Jones. Soon after being turned, the young goth declared it was all wrong for a vampire. She took the name Lilith, not bothering with a surname, likening herself to a vampiric Madonna or Cher. Despite not being blood-related, Eva, Didi, and Lilith had a common hatred of Sebastian Draco. If not for his dodgy business practices, Lilith wouldn't have been turned, and instead would be back in Wales rather than stuck half a world away. They brought the young goth up to date on the events of the evening, and she was as angry as they were. Leave it with me. I'll search through all the data for the last 3 days. If someone was in here, they'd have tripped a trigger, or left an energy signature or something.
If you've enjoyed this chapter, we'd love it if you could give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to continue the story, you can subscribe and tap the bell to be notified when the next chapter is released.